I have to say that I think it's a great honor to be here presenting for you at Ragn-Sellsberg's Stiftelsens, the Foundation Day. They're actually the reason that I was able to do my PhD. So thank you very much, all of you who are in the foundation, for that. I'm going to continue in English. I'm going to try not to switch to Swedish. I did the opposite once when I was in the US at a conversation presented in English, and somehow halfway through I switched to Swedish. And it took me about 2 minutes to notice that the eyes were just glazed over. What are you talking about? So just let me know if I switch to some strange language. I'm going to talk about how we're going to be moving towards generational, so long-term resource management, and a little bit of a follow-up on the discussions that Ad and I have had over the last year. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a quick background. I could talk about this slide and the things that are on this slide for an hour alone. We do have produced some documents in Ragn-Sells about it, or I'm glad that you can talk to me about it. But I'm going to fly through a little bit of background. One very big, important mental change that we need to understand is that waste, primary, secondary, urban stocks, they're all the same on the molecular level. All of these things are resources. If you look at them through a microscope, they're the same. The human construct of waste is a name that we've put on resources. And it's a way of putting it in a box, and we've created all sorts of steering mechanisms and all sorts of ways to manage our waste, separate from what we do with other resources. So we're just taking for given today that to achieve our goals, our long-term goals, our sustainable development goals, we need to look at all of our resources together and see how we can do the best to achieve our goals out of this whole capital stock that we have. So maybe you've seen this picture before. We've been talking about it in Ragn-Sells for a few years. So in essence, what we need to do is we need to lift our focus from seeing, okay, how can we take care of this in our systems, to how can we look at everything that we have access to and do the best that we can with it. So, how do we do that? And we might say, okay, well, this circular economy, this very nice picture of the circular economy is going to solve what we need to do with our entire resource stock. But I would say not. Unfortunately, all of the possible iterations of value chains you can think of in the circular economy are not equal, and actually not all of them are going to be positive impacts towards our goals that we have as society. So, if this is not going to solve it, to lead us towards these SDGs on the right, I hope everybody's familiar with them. And just for a little clarification, throughout the whole presentation, and my whole life actually, right now, I equate value to moving towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope everybody else can agree with me, or at least have a discussion about that. So how do we manage our resource stock? So we started thinking, okay, do we need a resource hierarchy? Do we need a resource priority principles? And that's kind of how we advertise today. So I hope you don't feel that we've done a little bit of a bait and switch on you, because what I'm going to present is not a resource hierarchy. And this is the reason why. There is an essential problem with having prescriptive measures when we're looking at managing our resources. Does anybody know what these are? Any guesses, wild guesses? I'll give you a hint. Those of you who have seen my presentation before can't answer. You know who these are? Oh, come on. Flintstones, thank you. Somebody's got the motivation. So these are Flintstones, and those are Flintstones. Copyright-free ones. But we have two molecularly exactly the same resources here. This is a picture of the same thing. But here we have, say we have, and we were talking about time, place, and function ad. But say we have this stone, this flintstone, and all of a sudden you realize that your kitchen sink is backing up. What's going on? You get in there, you open it up, and you realize, how did this stone get into my kitchen sink? Try to think in your head, what is the value of this stone in that situation? You can maybe put a ranking between 1 and 5. What's the value of that stone? And we're going to take another example. So say we're in the north of Sweden, we're taking a nice vacation. Maybe we're not that prepared. It got really cold overnight. Snow is coming up, it's beautiful. But you don't have a lighter, you don't have any matches, and it's starting to get really cold. You do have like a little iron rod. I don't know why. You have it in your pocket. All of a sudden, you can make fire with this flintstone. So I hope you can understand this time, place, and function. The value of these resources really is related to the context of when you're having those resources and where they are. So there we have. So I'm going to ask another question to you. Let's see if anybody vågar. What's the English? Anybody? Dares to answer here. What do we know, or what do you think that I think? No, I know is good at adapting to complex, dependent, context-dependent complexity. I'll give you a hint. I think it's a little bit ironic today because before I was an industrial ecologist, I was studying economy. And it's one of the reasons that I went into industrial ecology, because I saw some problems with economy. So I think it's a bit interesting what I'm going to bring up. The market. The market is actually a very good tool at assessing value in very complex networks. However, we know that a laissez-faire market is not leading us to where we want to go. And laissez-faire being no rules, regulations, no interrupting into the market. So what do? We have legislation, regulation. We have very important things that we started in the late 70s, such as principles that we then base our legislation and regulation off of. Here we have the waste hierarchy. And then we get even more complex because we start understanding, this prescriptive hierarchy sometimes from a life cycle perspective isn't best, and then we have to do a life cycle analysis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with life cycle analysis, but it can become very, very complex. And a drawback of it is it's very context dependent again. So we can spend 6 months or a year doing a life cycle analysis on recycling this paper instead of incinerating it based in Stockholm, but it's going to be relevant for this specific area, this specific context, that specific paper recycling facility. So I think it's going to be a world full of 90% life cycle analysts, and we have to continue doing this. Unfortunately, a lot of our steering mechanisms, a lot of our policies that we have are still prescriptive in the sense that they are focusing on that construct that we have called waste. So we're saying we need to reduce the waste. We need to cycle the waste. Would you say this about virgin or primary resources? If you were sitting on a forest or a mine of your own, would you say, here's a priority order of what I should do with my resources, my capital stock? And that's the same situation that we're working with wastes. So let's get to the root of the problem. And I think I'm going to give you 3 critical issues. None of them are that new, but I'm inside this context. Hopefully it can paint a nice picture for you. So the 3 critical issues that I see are these context irreverent or not dependent steering mechanisms, discounting of our future needs, and specific market information failure. So the first one. So we're back to this. Resources, wastes, urban stocks in themselves, they are not inherently bad. It's the bad impacts that are bad. It's the negative impacts that are bad. I'd like to kind of repeat that, because I think it's a bit of an aha here. It's not the waste that's bad. It's where, the time and the place and the function. So let's say we have a time, which is today a place, maybe it's in the ocean, and the function is creating pollution for fish. That's a very negative impact, and it's a very negative value of, say, some plastic debris. But if we have that plastic, and we have it put into, I don't know, this bin here, it's providing a function, it's holding up the computer, it's a lot more higher value. So it's the negative impacts. So what I want to kind of motivate our thinking about how we steer our resources and how we steer our waste is don't steer after the title, but still steer after the impacts. Moving into the second point is discounting our future needs. I think maybe a lot of you are familiar with the European Union's critical raw material list. It's been increasing the last 3 times they've put it out, the number of materials that are on there, but these are, here on the bottom right, are materials that are important for society, but also have a supply risk. So if we don't have access to these things, we're gonna have trouble fulfilling society's functions. You have another list from the US as well. The problem is, we know, it's been said by the governments, it's been said by the scientists, that we're going to have trouble with these. These are very important for our future. They're important in fulfilling what we have for our goals. But the prices of those are actually going down. How do we solve this? I don't know. That's what I just want to start a discussion here. We do have some ideas on how you can create maybe futures pricing, or you can have industries start thinking about what they have for needs into the future. But right now, the pricing of resources that we know are going to be critical in 5 years are nowhere near where they're needed to be to say, oh, we need to save this. Okay, now to our economics, quick economics 101 lesson. So this is what I would say a traditional value chain, supply chain. I'm going to jump up in here. So if we say this is what we say in the downstream, and this is the upstream, so this is more maybe consumer, sales, production, perhaps. What we have is we have an entity, a person here, perhaps, that has a demand for a quantity and maybe a specific quality of a material. They put a value on that. Here we have a producer. Maybe they have a material, a product, a service, quality and quantity as well. They put a price on that, yeah? On the same time, this is a purchaser. So each of these has 2 roles. And they're doing the same thing further up. So they're for meddling. They're sending this information. They're communicating it up the stream. So if we say, I really want tea lights, and they should be able to burn for 8 hours. And then they say, oh, well, we can provide that with this new beeswax that we have. And then the bees companies can say, yeah, we can produce that at this cost. Now I've put them into circles. So if we envision each one of these circles as a product life cycle, and what we're getting back to the root of what we're talking about today, we want to do improving generational resource management. So what we want to say is if we're putting in 1 unit of something here, so we say 1 kilogram of beeswax or 1 kilogram of copper, we want to be able to total up, add all of these cycles together, and see what is the value that we've provided to society in the long term. So, this would be great. The market can solve it. Yes? We just need to be able to connect together all of these other cycles. And unfortunately, we have a very critical issue when it comes to this flow of information that I showed you a few images back. The critical issue is here. That once we have post-use material, what we call waste, we're losing the information on exactly what that is and the demand from the downstream side along with it. I'll give you an example in a minute because it's a bit of a mind bender. But if you can think about it here we have the information on exactly what it is that they need that's been following through. It's following along with the product. But once it ends use, I'll show you what we do. We kind of put it into a pot and we aggregate it together and we call it waste. So we're going from very high definition value information to very low definition value information. And I'll give you an example. So let's say that we have a company. There's actually a company in I think they're from the Netherlands, Fairphone. So say we have Fairphone. They make a phone that's very easy to separate apart. They make a phone that has very high value components, and then they know that they can put into a new phone, and they know that it doesn't have toxic materials that's going to cost society a lot of money to take back. And we have another company that's producing a phone, and we can call it anti-SDG phone. And they're producing a phone it's cheap, but it's actually going to be very expensive to take care of when it's done with, and we won't be able to reuse any of the resources. The fair phone's maybe 150, the cheap phone's 75. But when we come to the end of the life here, that fair phone maybe still has 100 worth of value in it, whereas the 75 one is maybe minus 50 because we have to treat it. I'm just, for example. That information is lost here, especially when we aggregate things. In Sweden, we aggregate all of our electronic waste to 2 or 3, 4 crowns per kilogram. So we lose that. So the incentive for smarter design is gone. So the incentive for a company to actually design their products in a better way is lost. Some ways that we've tried to solve this is through producer responsibility, not working if we don't do it on a detailed level, or product as a service systems. And that's a very interesting one, where you close this market failure and you put the incentive back in the producer's hand. I'm being messaged that I need to hurry up, so I'm going to finish up my last few slides here. But imagine a future where doing good business and achieving the sustainable development goals go hand in hand. That's my dream, and I think it would be amazing if more companies would join Ragn-Sells in this vision. But I think one of the easiest ways to get a large majority of companies to join Ragn-Sells is to build it into the market mechanisms. So let's build our sustainable development goals into the market mechanisms. Let's internalize our externalities. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time to go into this slide, but let's put costs on things that we don't want in society. Let's make sure that we're not pushing debts or putting the future generations into a sticky situation where they don't have the resources that they need to fulfill their needs. And let's work together on finding good ways that we can solve this market failure. So I've put up kind of a long list, I'm not going to read through it, of different things that we can start working with in these 3 different areas. These will also be on YouTube later, if you want to go back and look at them. But then I've made a more specific call to action. So we have, I have specific for policymakers, for businesses, and for researchers. And I know there are many other sectors in society that we could talk to. But just to reiterate, let's not focus on the specific activities or specific titles of things, but what do we actually want to achieve? Your KPI is going to lead to your KPI. Let's internalize our externalities. Let's tax the bad. Here's one specific example that I had brought up as well. How can we help closing this information loop? Can we, for example, start working with product passports? Digitalization is maybe being an enabler for us now to be able to maintain that product information further through the cycle, that we can have those different layers of detailed information. And for researchers, I have some more specific areas. Maybe we don't want to have 90% of people in the world working with life cycle analysis. I think it's a great field to work in, but I think we also need to have a balance of working towards solving these issues. Yes. So, we're ready for coffee.
We won't go into coffee yet because we will give opportunity for you to do some questions. Before you have your questions in your mind, you can start thinking about them. I'd like to mention what the former Minister of Environment told me 2 weeks ago. She's, because I asked her, and she's not in politics anymore, that's very good. I asked her, when you transform it into a circular economy, what do we need to do? Well, Per, we need to change all legislation. And this is the biggest challenge, because today's politicians don't want to talk about it because they see it will create problem for them. So on the 12th of June, we will again invite Dr. Lansing to Sweden, and we will, together with the Embassy of the Netherlands and the Kingdom of Holland, and together with our International Chamber of Commerce, have a half day where we discuss exactly how to transform it. And then we invited former politicians to really take a stand and be honest. How should we do the transformation going forward? So we open up the floor now for a couple of questions, and then we'll take the fika break. Are there any direct questions that you would like to ask Dr. Aid or Dr. Lansing? We have one in the back.
Hello, Claes Palm from Uppsala University. What do we need to do, or what is the most important step to take in order to help companies such as Ragn-Sells to go abroad and work in, for example, developing countries who facing huge problems of not taking care of waste? I mean, we are working with this hard in Sweden, but I think we actually have bigger problems in maybe other continents and other countries. What can we do to export and develop the opportunities in those countries?
I can start answering the question, and I believe it's about sharing knowledge. We had a visit from Mauritius the other day, but the problem is if we should give them our knowledge, they say, sorry, what you're doing, we're not even there yet. And exactly what that has also Dr. Lansing talked about when he talked about Lebanon. So the problem is we would like to share, we do it willingly. Some of the things they might be able to implement. Some of the things will definitely make them to jump some of the mistakes that we have done. But the problem is the majority, they need to really implement the Lansing's ladder first, because that's a big challenge.
That was indeed in Beirut. After my presentation, somebody stood up in the audience and asked me, first he told me, that's a nice story, a very good idea, that hierarchy is very good, but we cannot copy-paste it in Lebanon, because we have another society, we have another welfare system, we cannot come, first we have to do this and all kinds of things. And I agreed with him, of course, that's there. And also in Johannesburg I learned that we have to sharing our knowledge, indeed, but on a modest way, because you have to take them, and they can gap that time period. And I tell them, of course, that it was 40 years ago that I presented that idea. So it took 40 years to get legislation, and more years to get all companies in it. So you can shorten the time in less developed countries, but first you have to share your knowledge, technology, and so on a modest way, and not in an how do you call it, arrogant way. So that's my advice.
We believe we might have the right answer, but sorry, the answer might lay some totally on a different place.
Yeah, just shortly, I definitely agree that there are huge potentials for improving the well-being of humankind by working in these areas. And I agree with you that we can't copy and paste. It's a time and a place and a function thing. But maybe one small side thing, maybe we can't go there and build up operations everywhere, but we do have some quite unique technologies. Then I think technologies are a lot easier to spread if they're low enough capital investment to spread around the world from Sweden.
Dr. Lansik did talk about the ash to phos technique that you highlighted that are owned by Ragn-Sells. And last July, I gave a speech in New York to the city of New York, and they have a problem. In 2030, they know that they can't landfill anymore of their sludge. So all megacities over the world really need our solution. But of course, first you need to have a wastewater plant, and the majority of the world don't even have it. So there are some steps we need to take first in order to create these perfect circular solutions. Any more questions? We have one in. We can take two questions. One here. Are there anyone else that would like to take a question? Otherwise, we end with that question. Thank you. Kai and Brian.
A question related to also the political risks and system thinking. If you have solutions and the political sector doesn't have the mindset of system thinking, how can we provoke the political system to change their mindset?
That's a very difficult question. Nevertheless, I'm optimistic after the election yesterday, the European election, because there was a shift. Yesterday evening, I saw the election results. So our Labour Party, I was not a Labour, but I still near side Labour, has gone the first place, and the second one, my party and the Liberals. So the right side of the political spectrum has not gained that much as was expected. That's first. Dus you have a political spectrum, political support from people with a long-term vision, with a kind of system thinking, not in 2, 3 or 4 years, but even further. And also on this way, on a modest way, so not too fast, but not in a good speed, and with knowledge in itself. So they have to understand some things about natural laws, so thermodynamics, and so on. So it took a lot of time to draw them back from their day-to-day behavior. And that's I do not know the situation in Sweden, but in the Netherlands it looks like a day-to-day business politics, and that's not good for this kind of things, because you need a long-term vision. Somebody asked me, how is it possible that 40 years ago you had that vision, and still true? Yeah, I don't know, but I think that at that time we had more time to think about things and to look for a good way. It's now too much from day-to-day living. That's my answer.
Before I let you in, I will say that make the politicians the hero. Give them the example that they then can bring back and then make the legislation. So we need to prove that things work. And if you try to be the hero by yourself, you will fail. So create partnerships, helping others, raising good practice examples. That, I think, is the way forward.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I would say prove that things work, and to prove that, you need to dare to try new things.
Yeah. Okay, unfortunately, we will cut down the amount of time for the break. It's now 10:10, so it means that you will need to be back here at 10:30, and that also for you that are watching here online. So please come back in 20 minutes, fika, discuss. Me and Dr. Lansik will need to leave at 12 sharp, so if you want to discuss anything with Dr. Lansik before we leave, so take it in the fika break then. Thank you.